Welcome back to the Modern Athlete Podcast. I'm pumped for tonight's episode with Erik Grohmann. Most of you guys who are on Warfighter have seen Erik's face on either social media, YouTube, things like that. He is our dietitian, and he's going to go through tonight basically the annual plan we put together for Warfighter from the strength and conditioning standpoint. We're going to go back and forth from a nutritional standpoint and how you can kind of target that. So, Erik, what's up, brother? Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's always good to be on. Obviously, love rapping about nutrition any chance I get. So I think this is a great topic. And, we can dive into the weeds a little bit, touch on some nuances. But the way Modern Athlete develops his annual plan is fantastic. So to pair that, obviously, with the right nutrition strategy is going to ensure that the results are what people are looking for.
Awesome, brother. Looking forward to it. So as we're in this first cycle, it actually works out well because we are in the first block. So the first block of training for us on the annual training calendar, you guys, if you don't have it, you can go on our socials. You can find it on Instagram. We post it on there. So you can refer back to this, but I'm going to talk through it. So January through March, Erik, is our strength and hypertrophy block. With that, that's from the strength side of things. And then from a conditioning side of the house, we are working on run and ruck mileage buildup, and we are basically building strength, aerobic base, body composition, and initial testing within that first block. So again, it's probably easier if you think about me as like a new person to Warfighter of like, how would I even go about my nutrition for this first block of training?
Absolutely. So if we look at this in the sense of, traditional athletics or even tactical specifically, this would be postseason, right? You're coming off a season or you're just getting back from deployment. And now we're in this block. This is the time that we are going to address any lingering injuries, and we are going to try to correct some deficiencies from last year or the previous season or the last deployment. So this looks different for everybody. It could be that we're nursing an injury that we just powered through to get through the deployment or to get through the, athletic season. It could be that our body composition wasn't exactly what we wanted it to be. And now we're going to try to put on some size, maybe cut some fat, so on and so forth. This first block is the block that we're really going to start addressing all of that. So let's go ahead and just unpack the first topic, which is injury recovery. So obviously injuries is a pretty broad topic. So we'd have to look at the injury specifically. For example, if for any reason you're dealing with a stress fracture, we're going to address all of the primary nutrients of concern there from a nutritional standpoint. Obviously, there's also training tactics that we're going to use to correct and heal and get things going to where they need to be. But like with the stress fracture, right, we're going to touch on things like calcium, obviously, magnesium, phosphorus, and high protein intake to make sure that we're giving the bone everything it needs so that it can heal. There are a ton of different injuries, so we can't cover them all, but I just wanted to elucidate the point that, this is the time to really start addressing that and fixing it before the season at the end of the annual plan or the next deployment, whatever it may be. The next item is body composition. So right now, because we're not actively in a season or we're not actively deployed, this is a great time to introduce a caloric deficit if we're trying to cut back or taper, or introduce a caloric surplus if we're trying to put on some weight. And the reason it's such a good time to do it now is nothing's really on the line, right? So for example, let's say the deficit we put you in is maybe a little too much. Well, that may result in a training day that's less than optimal because you're underfueled. Well, that's okay because it's just training, right? We're not actively deployed. There's no lives on the line. We're not in the middle of a football game, right, where you're bonking out because you're underfueled. This is the time that we can really start dialing in and finding our maintenance calorie load for this training block and then adjusting as necessary up or down to match the body composition goal. So a different way to put it is there's very low risk in now starting to adjust for body composition, and it buys us some time to really iron out what maintenance calories are for any given individual. So this first training block, those are the two primary concerns, is injury recovery and body composition, and then really starting to dial in those numbers and those specific nutrients moving forward. From a training standpoint in general, let's say you don't have an injury and let's say your body composition's solid and you just want to get going. Well, obviously there's a lot of strength building here. So when we look at overall nutrient distribution, our carbohydrates in the range, and just for those of you who have not heard me speak or haven't gotten the nutrition guide or haven't seen it, carbohydrates we'll start with. That ranges for an athlete from 3 to 12 grams per kilo of body weight. So on the low end, which would be 3 grams per kilo, that's traditional for somebody that is really focused on strength and power, right? Their carbohydrate need is lower than somebody on the other end of the spectrum, which is 12 grams per kilo. So the first thing that comes to my mind would be an ultra long distance runner. And that would be like they're about to go on, their competition run. That is how many carbohydrates they're consuming. So in this block, because we're so focused on strength building, our carbohydrates can be a little lower. If you want a big range, I'd say anywhere between like maybe 3 to 7 grams per kilo, depending on the individual and their carbohydrate tolerance, assuming this person is more well trained, they're used to consuming more carbohydrates because they've been doing it for a long period of time. 5 to 7 is a sweet spot. That's really kind of like the hybrid athlete sweet spot. If somebody is coming and they're new to this programming and they're coming from like a low carbohydrate background, recommendation would probably be to start at that 3 gram per kilo and slowly work your way up into that sweet spot, 5 to 7. Your body needs to get used to consuming that level of carbohydrates. Some people that are coming from a low carb background can experience some GI distress, especially if they're consuming too much at once. So really working with that individual and dialing in that carbohydrate intake is going to be the first area nutritionally from the macronutrient standpoint that I'll probably focus on. And
And real quick, Eric, just because I have a question, because I think a lot of people have this question as well. From a carbohydrate standpoint, if somebody wants to go up or down, doesn't matter. Are we doing that calculation based on what we want to weigh or what we currently weigh? Because I think
mm,
that's a big question for a lot of people. Like, well, I want to drop 10 pounds or gain 10 pounds. Am I eating that calculation based on me wanting to weigh 210 pounds or my current body weight at 200 pounds?
that's a great question. So I always just use current body weight. And there's a couple different ways to determine an individual's overall caloric intake, right? So, or let's take one step back. To do macro splits and calorie intake, we can go about it one of two ways. We can use a predictive equation, something like Mifflin St. Jeor, and get a number for BMR. We can then multiply that by an activity factor, and that gives us like a pretty good idea of where maintenance calories should be. Then we can do a 3 to 500 calorie deficit or surplus, depending if they want to cut weight or gain weight. From that new number, we can determine carbohydrates, protein, and fat based on the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. So, for example, carbohydrates is going to be 45 to 65% total calories. So, looking at that for like a strength athlete, we'd probably put them at the 45% mark to start. That gives us more wiggle room, a bigger bucket, so to speak, for protein, because that needs going to be a little bit higher. And then whatever remaining calories exist, we can dedicate that to fat. The other way to go about it, which I use typically for somebody that's more of a traditional athlete, somebody that's really training hard, their profession demands their body's ability to perform. So this isn't somebody, working out just to stay in shape. This is somebody that is a traditional athlete. We're going to use typically weight-based calculations for the macros, and that's that 3 to 12 for carbs, like 1.4 to 2.2 for protein, and then 1 gram per kilo for fat. So with those numbers, we'll calculate their carbohydrate need in grams, their protein need in grams, and their fat need in grams. That will then give us a calorie number once we do all the math. Then I will set them in a deficit or a surplus. I'll just subtract 300 to 500 calories from that number. And then they can pick and choose kind of where they want to take that hit. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit of everything, maybe a little bit of carbohydrate, a little bit of protein, depending where it's at, and a little bit of fat. But I use their current body weight. Typically, if the person is overall in a pretty good place, body comp wise, that's a good way to go about it. The only time things can get askew is if their body composition is really not ideal, right? If they're carrying a lot of excess body fat, the numbers can get a little wonky. In that case, I will encourage an individual to get a DEXA scan. That will give me a really good, accurate lean mass. I will then use a different predictive equation, the Cunningham equation, which gives me a maintenance calorie number based on their lean mass. Then I'll use the acceptable macro numbers, those 45 to 65%, 1.4 to 2.2 grams per kilo for protein, so on and so forth. And that's the way I go about it if somebody's body composition is further away from the ideal range than I'd like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was just going to have a follow up to that. So if somebody is in a surplus, if somebody wants to be in a surplus or a deficit, regardless of which one, and do you care where those calories are coming from? I know you said you could kind of sprinkle it about between carbohydrates, protein, and fat, but let's say, all right, I'm a meat eater. I want to eat more protein if I'm trying to put on more size. Like I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can relate to that. Is that okay? Does the calories matter at that point, where those calories are coming from? Or can I just increase by 500 calories with, or have 300 to 500 calories with protein and a little bit of carbs?
So yes and no. It
Okay.
really depends on where their numbers shake out. So for example, if that individual's already at 2.2 grams per kilo or 1 gram per pound for protein, you can get those extra calories from protein should you choose, but the amount of difference it's going to make in building is small. It's not to say there's no difference, it's just not as significant. If we can think of it like a exponential curve, as you approach that 2.2, right? The amount of gain is steeper. And then once we hit that kind of threshold, you're still going to gain, but it's going to really slow down. So you're getting less bang for your buck essentially.
Gotcha.
Now, an increased protein diet will give you an added thermic effect, meaning you're burning more calories to digest that nutrient, which can aid in some fat burning. So there's nothing wrong with getting those extra calories from protein. But if your carbohydrate numbers weren't in that 5 to 7 sweet spot, I would encourage that individual to get those calories typically from carbohydrate to give them an added energy bump so that they can train harder, especially in the context of that individual consuming adequate protein. Then I know that they've got the building blocks, those amino acids that they need to build the muscle tissue, but now they might be able to train a little bit harder,
I
putting
like
those
that.
amino acids to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. And yeah, 100% agree. And I guess it would fall in the same lines with a deficit as well, like looking at your protein numbers and, all right, maybe we'll pull from carbs if you're still within that range. So
Yes.
I think a
Yes.
lot of people will grab it because that's a confusing one, even for me. Like I'm a strength coach for 20 years and it's still confusing. Like, all right, where should I get these calories from? And basically, you're saying as long as you're in the protein range, then might as well increase. If I'm trying to increase, I might as well increase my carbohydrates. So I feel better going into training. I have more energy and I still, as you said, have the building blocks to put on lean muscle mass. So no,
Yes.
I like
And
that.
those are the two nutrients that I really play with the most is going to be your carbohydrates and your protein. Protein, obviously, for building purposes, and then carbohydrates for energy purposes, as it is your body's preferred energy source. Fat is an incredibly important macronutrient, and it's not to ignore that fact. That being said, it's doing less for you in the moment than the other two macronutrients. For example, you're not going to eat an avocado pre-training and that fat be digested and used for usable energy during training. Whereas if you ate carbohydrate, it would.
Mhm.
So for those reasons, fat kind of, falls to the wayside a little bit as long as, again, they're consuming enough fat and the acceptable range for fat is 20 to 35% total calories. So I never want to see somebody fall below that 20% threshold. On that same note, if that individual is consuming enough carbohydrate and adequate protein, if they want those extra calories to come from fat, no problem whatsoever, especially if we're choosing good, high quality fats, something like extra virgin olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds. All of those foods offer a ton of beneficial nutrition. Um, and if you need to bump up your calorie game, sometimes because fat is so energy dense, it's a great source to choose from. At the end of the night, it's like, oh man, like I'm hungry. I need some more calories. Man, like some peanut butter and a banana, peanut butter toast, something like that, just to get a big calorie hit at the end of the day. Nothing wrong with that, especially because that fat will help us feel satiated or full a little bit longer. And that is a very strategic use of that nutrient.
Awesome. No, that's great. Selfishly, I'm getting a lot out of it, so I know our audience will as well. So that's awesome, brother. Um, and then anything else you wanted to touch on with that first block of training with the hypertrophy/strength?
No, I think that really covers it, but I will take one step back because I think we captured a good point, and I just kind of want to outline it a little bit better. If you haven't picked up on it by now, you can tell that this is why we don't offer cookie cutter diet plans. Or, if you're doing one to one, it's not going to be, a generic training plan. There's a lot of individuality depending on a individual's goals that nutrition will play a role in, and it needs to be tailored to that person. We talked about, the individual with a undesirable body composition, or the individual that has got a perfect body composition. They're not, ready to change it. So when we think about this first block, it really depends on where you're coming from. And you have to decide what your goals are for that year. Are we recomping the body? Now's the time to start addressing that composition change because, again, it is low risk in terms of performance.
Awesome. And just, and this can apply to any phase, but there's a lot of ideas out there and there's a lot of stuff on social media. Same with strength and conditioning. There's the same for nutrition advice as well. As far as like increasing carbs on strength days versus going lower carb on conditioning days, do you buy any stock in that, or do you prefer just being more consistent with your daily choices?
So again, similar to the protein curve, there can be an advantage to doing that periodization with your carbohydrates. I see nothing wrong with it. Just from experience, one thing I've found is that it can be really hard to actually put into practice. It
Yeah,
sounds really good on paper,
of
and
course.
logically it makes sense. And even physiologically, there can again be those advantages and disadvantages. But if we're talking with an individual that has other obligations in life other than just training, it can become ever more difficult to plan for that because now, if we're talking about planning your food for an entire week, well, meal prep can be pretty challenging because now it's going to be, 3 days our carb intakes this, 2 days our carb intakes this, and it just becomes harder to actually apply. And this brings up a really good point about nutrition in general that is like a personal gripe of mine. There's so many things out there that it's like, oh yeah. And I'm guilty of doing this when I speak on podcasts, when I put out posts on Instagram. You know, Sometimes we have to realize that somebody has to apply this information at the end of the day. It's like the new dietary guidelines. This is all great. We've got this beautiful image of what people should eat. But so often I feel like in the profession of nutrition, we don't do a good enough job of teaching people how to apply that information because we really have to take into consideration that people lead busy lives. People have kids, people have jobs outside of training, and we need to give digestible information that people can, actually put into their real world, eating.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this is a great example with periodization. Again, it's great. It does have some advantages at times, depending on what they're training for. But the person that is using the strategy needs to be able to put that into practice. So that's something for our listeners that you have to be honest with yourself. Do I have time? Do I have the patience to calculate these differences day to day? to shop for those differences when I'm creating my grocery list, to prepare for those differences, right? Like, am I gonna, you know, adjust my rice or pasta or potato intake each of these days? Some people can really do a good job with that and they have no issues. Other people want to try it and find it to be really difficult. So, back to your original question, most oftentimes I will encourage people to consume roughly the same amount consistently throughout the week because it's easier to put into practice.
100% agree. And then as you're talking, I'm thinking, especially with our population being tactical professionals, police, fire, military, first responder, like your job is physical as well. A lot of people that are with us. So to have like a lower carb day, just because it's from a conditioning standpoint, it's a easy pace run, but then you still have to do your job and you don't want to be sucking energy wise. And you actually have to run into a burning building and like you actually do your job or anything like that. So I 100% agree from the planning standpoint. It's hard enough for people. Then you layer on if your job requires physical performance, you're not just sitting at a desk all day. That matters as well. So that's
Yes.
another reason why just having that balance and consistency day to day is a lot easier. One, to prepare for, and then two, to feel consistent every single day versus having these highs and lows.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's such a good point. And it brings up one more point, and I won't dive into the weeds because we just talked about it for the Q&A, but it brings up the nutrition performance hierarchy, right? There's three basic steps in the pyramid, at least the way I build my performance nutrition hierarchy. The bottom of the pyramid being the things you need to be consistent in most days is eating enough food. And by eating enough, that includes not overeating and not undereating, eating enough for your body, doing that consistently. From there, making sure your macronutrient intake falls within to the appropriate splits, consuming enough carbohydrates, enough protein, and enough fat, and then staying hydrated, right? So I won't even go into the top two tiers, but so many people still have trouble just mastering the bottom of that pyramid because life's busy and I get it, right? I think we all can admit that it's not always easy day to day to hit all of those things consistently, but the focus really needs to be there before we can get to the top of the pyramid, which includes things like strategic supplementation or carbohydrate periodization or these more nuanced strategic strategies that require a lot more diligence, timing, practice, experience to really put into place. Because you can do that all day. You could try the new latest and greatest supplement and time your caffeine perfectly and do carbohydrate periodization. But if one day you're under fueling by 600 calories and the next day you're over fueling by 1,000 calories and the next day you're right on the money and so on and so forth, and your consistency is a mess, those strategies aren't really going to do much for you. You really have to become a master in the basics, the stuff that doesn't get all of the Instagram likes and the shares because it's not sexy. It's the stuff that gets the job done, that makes the most sense, but it isn't flashy. It's not clickbait.
Yeah. And it's the same for strength and conditioning as well. The stuff that gets the most likes or that don't get the most likes is like a basic back squat, a basic bench press, a good pull up and all these things, but it doesn't have crazy bands attached to it. You're not balancing on a balance beam or a Bosu ball or whatever, but the fundamentals work. Fundamentals matter if you're playing a sport, shooting a gun, or lifting a barbell. Fundamentals always will matter, and same thing for nutrition. So I'm glad you hit on that because I think that's really important. So
Yeah,
um,
so going back to the annual plan, this first block is a really great opportunity to make sure that the bottom of that hierarchy we've got dialed in. You start to iron out any of the inconsistencies that maybe you have had in the past. Maybe you are not in the habit of meal prepping. Well, this first training block, guess what? Now's a really good opportunity to get in the habit of prepping and planning and thinking ahead. You have the framework, right? Like you said, you can go find this framework online. We have it posted many different places. You can start to really look ahead, right? At the very least, people should be looking a week ahead and saying, okay, here's kind of what my training is going to be like next week. Let's start planning for that nutritionally, right? What kind of meals am I going to be eating, right? Based on my macronutrient splits and my calories, so on and so forth. Planning is such a crucial part of nutrition consistency. So often I'll have a client that said, "Oh, I had a birthday party, like, oh, things went off the rails." My first question is, "Well, how long ago did you know about that birthday party?" And they say, "Oh, like 2 weeks ago." Well, that's something that could have been planned for, right? It's only the things that show up last minute, to your point about running into a burning building, that probably wasn't planned for, right? That's not something you can plan for. But so many things that get used as excuses are things that absolutely could have been planned for in advance.
Yeah. No, 100% agree. No, it's a great point, Eric. Love it. Cool, man. Well, so we just covered the first block of training. Looking at the next block, I got the annual training plan right in front of me. So this next block will be April through June. So again, just thinking it's going into beach slash lake season, popping the top off, all those things. Focus is strength endurance, a little bit higher volume work, some emphasis on long carries. Let's see what else. Steady work in the woods or field. So more like longer distance type work from a conditioning side of the house. We're also trying to improve our mid distance runs, whether it's 2 mile, 5 mile improvements. Still going to be rucking and we're going to be building some work capacity as well in this block. So again, I know the trends are probably going to be pretty similar nutrition wise, but I'd like to hear your initial thought from, again, going into the summer, working strength endurance, going to be popping the top off, all those things coming up soon. So, what would be your approach to that as well?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, my favorite topic, which is carbohydrates, of course, we want to make sure that we understand energy systems. I spend a lot of time with clients talking about this. I try my best to talk about this every chance I get on any platform I have the opportunity to do so on. But energy systems are important to understand. We need to know what our body is using as a fuel source during different types of movement, right? So, for example, if you're exploding up out of a squat, the phosphagen system is being used. Creatine is the fuel source. If you're doing an all out sprint, right, carbohydrates are going to be the primary fuel source using that anaerobic glycolysis. Okay. So you're burning through carbohydrates at an exponential rate. And then long duration endurance, you're also burning a substantial amount of carbohydrates. You're burning more fat than an all out sprint, but you're still burning a tremendous amount of carbohydrates. So
And
looking
real
at
quick,
this train,
sorry, Eric. I just want to touch on that because that covers both lanes here. Important thing to note is where your heart rate is for those runs as well. If it's meant to be an easy zone one, zone two run, in order to burn those fats, you have to be running on the slower side of things. So that's the other
yes.
benefit of going long and slow is because what Eric is talking about, now you're burning fat for your fuel source as opposed to carbohydrates, as Eric mentioned with the other two energy systems. So I just wanted to touch on that because people get frustrated with, I'm doing a long zone two run or any type of low impacts for zone two. If you have a tough time buying into that, just understand you're going to be burning fat as your fuel source. So if your goal is to burn body fat, that's a good way to do it. So I'll hit pause there and I'll let you keep eating there.
Yeah. So it really all comes down to oxygen, right? Because the way our body will take carbohydrate and convert it into ATP to be used as fuel or fat really depends on oxygen. So when oxygen is readily available, meaning that we're running at a conversational pace, like me and Jimmy are talking right now, and we're on a light jog, right? That's zone one, zone two, your body's burning a lot of fat and it's burning carbohydrate, but it's burning fat because you have a lot on your body to be used as fuel and you have oxygen, meaning that fat can actually be used for energy. But now, if we break into an all out sprint, we're huffing and puffing. We don't have a lot of oxygen available. Now our body needs to shift into that anaerobic glycolysis, right? So we can still produce ATP, but it's very inefficient essentially. So your carbohydrate tank starts going really fast because now, opposed to getting like 20 plus ATPs from the entire, aerobic system, now we're getting like 2 ATPs from the anaerobic system, and your body's burning a lot of it. So you're burning through a tremendous amount of carbohydrate. So understanding these different types of intensities and durations, and then what your body is actually using for a fuel substrate is important. So back to what this block is actually intending to do, there is going to be some more endurance-based work. So we want to definitely make sure that we're consuming adequate carbohydrate to power through those longer duration movements so we have energy ready to go. Okay. So especially on the high intensity days, not falling short in the carbohydrate department is going to be ever more important. And this comes down to timing, nutrient timing as well. We want to make sure that we're priming our workouts appropriately with carbohydrate primarily, depending on the duration of the activity for the day. If it's over an hour, maybe we start talking about incorporating some intra workout carbohydrate. Like I talked about, if it's a day, a conditioning session that does require a heart rate that is elevated, right now we're bumping out of zone 2 and looking upwards. Well, now we might be kicking into that anaerobic system where our carbohydrate tank's going like this. So we want to make sure we prime ourselves with appropriate carbohydrate going into that session, potentially a little bit to supplement us during the session, and then making sure we consume adequate carbohydrate following the session to start rebuilding the glycogen that we surely used during that session. This training block is a great time to really dial in, right? Assuming now that in block 1, we've kind of mastered the base of the pyramid, now we can really start tweaking that nutrient timing. So is it a standard workout where we're going to consume like 30 grams of carbs going into the workout? Or is it something that is a little bit more intense? We're talking like hour and a half, 2-hour session, possibly. Now we're probably going to talk upwards of 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate going into the session, and then another 30 to 60 at the hour mark to supplement what we surely burned during the first part of the session. And then if we talk post-workout carbohydrate consumption, really depends on the goal of the individual. Somebody's cutting or tapering, the range is like 0.5 to 1 gram per kilo. And if that person's building, it's 1 to 1.5 grams per kilo post-workout. And that's to ensure that we have enough carbohydrate to rebuild the glycogen. Protein, to your point about things staying relatively the same throughout these training blocks, protein would be a great example. So if our protein, again, is at 2.2 grams per kilo, 1 gram per pound, that is surely an adequate amount to build lean mass. If you would like to consume more, and calorically you have the budget to do so, going up to 2.4, 2.5, sure. But just know that the advantage is much smaller now. So if those calories could be put into a carbohydrate bucket, because maybe you're not in that 5 to 7 grams per kilo range, I would allocate those calories there, especially in this training block, to get us through those endurance and higher intensity days.
Awesome. And let's say, again, this is all hypothetical. So let's say phase 1 from January through the March timeframe, our goal was to put on 10 pounds. So how often do you weigh, or you recommend people weighing themselves for them to use that new number as part of their calculation? Because some
So
people
I
get obsessed like every day weighing themselves. Hey, I'm 5 pounds heavier. Do I use that as my calculation now because I'm 205 and whatever? So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so depending on the size of the individual, we hold so much water in our bodies that a 5 pound fluctuation for a bigger dude is not all that uncommon. Weight can fluctuate 5 pounds a day just simply based on hydration status. So I typically try ideally 3 to 4 weeks as a washout period to really kind of gauge weight. Then we should have a better indication of whether we truly gained or lost weight, and then we can tease out whether there's hydration differences, so on and so forth. I don't really start messing with numbers too much until we have, depending on the individual, like a 5 to 10 pound gain or loss. And then we can start talking a little bit about renegotiating the numbers.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So still sticking as far as protein with that same 1 gram per pound, or the, would you say 2.2 per kilogram?
Yeah, and those things are exactly the same. So
Yeah,
2.2
exactly.
grams per kilo or 1 gram per pound, it's the same, and that is essentially the upper end of the protein range. Again, there could be reasons to go higher, but the advantage is much smaller than opposed to, for example, if the need is 1 gram per pound and you're consuming like 0.6 grams per pound, that gap to get up to the 1 gram per pound, you'd notice a lot of improvement, right? If we were to actually measure the change. But then if you are at the adequate amount and you go up to, let's say, a higher amount, like 1.3 grams per pound, there still would be some gain, but it would be much less significant than if we were to be short of that
Yeah.
adequate number.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times people don't realize they think they're eating a lot of protein, but they don't realize how much it takes to hit that. Let's say you're 200 pounds to hit 200 grams of protein. That's tough, especially just on whole meals. Like I struggle with that myself. Like I know you're going to go against this, like supplementation wise, but again, I use supplements to supplement certain macronutrients. So I like to supplement with protein powder so I can actually hit my protein goals. So I'm not constantly eating and things like that. It's a lot easier just to whack back a shake. So
Yeah, and I'm definitely not anti-supplement. Like
yeah,
I
no, I
know,
knew that. Yeah,
especially using you as an example, like I know your diet squared away. So you are using protein powder exactly the way it's intended to be used to
yeah,
supplement an already good diet.
yeah, yeah. Because I just meant from your standpoint, if people are skipping meals and they're just supplementing with more shakes, that's not a supplement at that point. That is your meal. Is a
Yes.
yeah.
Now it is a replacement.
Correct. Exactly. So no, that's an awesome point there, Eric. Cool. So that covers block 2. So a lot of takeaways from that block. So that takes us now from July through September. So the heat of the summer. So we are working similar from the nutrition standpoint to the strength standpoint. I talk about a pyramid as well. So the base of my pyramid is going to be built on hypertrophy and strength. And then as you get those qualities, you basically earn the right to do more explosive power work. So now we are 6 months in. So for these next 3 months over the summer, now we're still building strength, but now we're increasing some power components as well. So from the conditioning side of things, we're still working mid distance run just because of our population. And then work capacity is still going to be in the program as well. So, your thoughts again, there's going to be a lot of repeats, I'm sure, but overall thoughts now, picture like violent lifting, maybe some Olympic lifts, submaximal weights for maximum velocity, trying to have as much intent, trying to move the bar as violently as possible. And just your thoughts from a nutrition standpoint.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't talked about so far, but we just kind of alluded to it talking supplements is creatine. So obviously we mentioned it briefly when we were talking about, you know, energy systems and using the phosphagen system. So during these explosive violent movements, we want to make sure that that fuel substrate or that fuel source is topped off in our bodies. So if an individual isn't already supplementing with creatine, this would be a great opportunity to start. Because although creatine is found naturally in food sources like red meat, you need to eat such a high amount of it to get the saturation levels that we're looking for that it's not really feasible, especially if you're planning to eat other beneficial foods that take up more space in your stomach. So ensuring that our creatine stores are topped off is going to be ever more important. Okay. But assuming now that our carbohydrates are kind of ironed out. We've been experimenting now through the first 2 blocks. We've got a really good idea of what our body needs for different types of movements and different types of training days. We feel really good about our protein numbers. Our body's doing it what it needs to do. That all stays the same. Now we really start to focus on the nuances, right? We start to worry about timing, right? Really dialing in our timing for certain workouts and recovery. The more we get into this explosive work, this high intensity, violent work, we tend to do a little bit more damage to the body. And we also potentially are at slightly increased risk for injury just due to the nature of the movement. So we want to do everything we can nutritionally to support recovery. So, what does that look like? I break it down into 4 R's. The first one is to refuel after working out. Okay. That is getting some carbohydrates in immediately to start replenishing the glycogen, getting your, um, oh, sorry, to the next R. I got ahead of myself. So the first one's refueling, and that's carbohydrates. The next one's going to be rebuilding or repairing, and that's going to be your protein intake, getting the building blocks needed to repair the muscle damage that you did through these movements. Third one is going to be rehydrating, just making sure you're consuming enough. So these first 3 R's, the refuel, repair, hydrate, that should be consistent throughout all of the training blocks so far. We've kind of alluded to. The last R is reduce, and that is referring to reducing inflammation. Now, this should also really be done at all points throughout the training blocks, but this is a really important one to not miss out. So, at all points throughout training, our bodies are going to be in somewhat of an inflamed state. It's just the nature of training. And inflammation isn't a bad thing. Inflammation is a very natural and healthy process. The problem is if it becomes too much and it goes unchecked for too long, now we can start really getting into a spot we don't want to be in. So, what are some things we can do nutritionally to help kind of combat some of this inflammation? Well, the first thing I go to is what I deem a superfood from the athletic training standpoint, which is tart cherry juice. Tart cherry juice is studied and it is been shown clinically to reduce muscle soreness post workout, like clinically a significant amount. So, one of the reasons it is so good for recovery is aside from the high polyphenol content of the dark red in the cherries, right, which provides a lot of antioxidants and other beneficial compounds to start attacking this inflammation. It's naturally high in melatonin, so it helps to improve our sleep. And this definitely crosses into into your lane, Jimmy. Um, and something we talk about at Mass all the time, but sleep is so important for your recovery. So anything we can do nutritionally to really ensure we're getting enough sleep, really important. The next thing, piggybacking off that comes to mind is magnesium. So magnesium is really important for your muscle functions, right? Especially for your muscles to be able to relax. So if you're deficient in magnesium or not consuming enough, you also have a hard time sleeping, right? Especially if your muscles aren't allowed to do what they need to do and you wake up stiff and sore and toss and turn. So some tart cherry juice high in melatonin, making sure we're topped off on magnesium. Obviously, as a dietitian, I'm going to say food first, right? So find those great sources of magnesium like nuts and seeds, even some dark chocolate. But if you're not getting enough through food, supplementing with some like magnesium by glycinate or glycinate. Sorry. Long day. The brain is sparking. But yeah, supplementing with a little magnesium glycinate just to fill the gap. That would be really crucial. And then just making sure that we're eating a lot of color throughout the day, a lot of colorful fruits and vegetables to provide our bodies with adequate antioxidants and those other phytochemicals that help combat the inflammatory state of the body. Extra virgin olive oil is another powerhouse in this category. It contains oleocanthal, which has an anti-inflammatory effect somewhat comparable to ibuprofen. So super powerful food in the anti-inflammatory department. Turmeric, active ingredient, curcumin, that could be another one you can introduce. But just making sure from a general standpoint, going back to what I mentioned about myself, how can we apply this information? That first and foremost, without getting to the nitty gritty, if you don't want to buy the tart cherry juice or get on curcumin, just making sure that your meals and snacks throughout the day offer you a lot of color and variety. That's going to ensure that we're eating this anti inflammatory diet that really benefits our body for recovery, especially in the context of those first 3 R's: refueling, repairing, and rehydrating. Assuming those are dialed in, now you can start making sure that you're getting those colorful foods, incorporating things like tart cherry juice, making sure you're consuming enough omega-3 fatty acids. That could be eating some fatty fish like salmon or sardines. It could be taking a fish oil supplement, but making sure that we get enough omega-3s, which also offer some degree of anti-inflammatory benefit.
That's awesome. That's a great point. Um, One thing I was thinking, especially coming from college athletics, we would supplement our athletes once in a while with tart cherry juice. The only thing I found is I'd be curious your thoughts, and if you don't want to recommend a brand, I totally get it. But they're just so expensive. So like, I don't want to name brands, but do you have any recommendations of getting that supplement into you besides just fitting the bill for tart cherry juice?
Yeah, so the brand that I personally do like is also semi-expensive. It's Cherry Bundy. I
That's the
think
one we use.
overall, yeah, I figured that was the one. You can also find tart cherry juice at the store. You're just looking for something that's higher quality, right? I mean, you can, this doesn't always shake out appropriate, but if you go to the store and you pick up one tart cherry juice and you pick up another tart cherry juice and one looks watered down and the other one looks like blood and crimson, I would choose the one that looks like blood and crimson, right? You can tell just visually that one has probably got a higher concentration of those tart cherries. And tart cherry juice itself is like a concentrated form of the food. You can even just get some tart cherries that are frozen and throw them into a smoothie. Now, of course, the concentrated juice is going to have more of the benefit, but let's say you don't want to spend coin on that and you don't like the taste of it, just throwing some tart cherries into a smoothie with some protein powder and some other carbohydrate is a good way to at least get some of that benefit post workout.
And what is there a recommended serving size for tart cherries, like tart
Well,
cherry
so
juice?
the if you look at like the cherry bundy, they're doing a lot of cherries, like more than you're physically going to eat. So yes, there are recommendations. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure at the numbers. If I go back and dig through the studies, it will have the concentration of the supplements that were used to elicit that effect. I know
Gotcha.
for sure that companies like Cherry Bundy are using dosages in that amount. That
Gotcha.
is how they market their product. I'm not sure. I want to say it might be like, I could be totally off here, but like 60 cherries or something like that into that.
Yeah, I was thinking more so from a like the juice standpoint because you get the big container. You're obviously not going to drink thirty
Oh,
six 36
sure.
ounces, you know?
Yeah, I'd
So
say like an 8-ounce serving would
8
be
ounce,
appropriate.
perfect. Okay, cool. Yeah, cherries, I don't know if anybody's gonna be whacking back like 100 cherries a day to hit it, but the juice is a lot easier. So, no, that's helpful because that was always something that I thought like, all right, I'm buying this container. How many ounces do I need to elicit the benefits? Because you could always water it down and stuff like that.
Yep.
So,
I mean,
okay,
there's been times where like, let's say like post ultra marathon, like I will consume a lot more than 8 ounces. Like I basically take a full thing of tart cherry juice, a full thing of coconut water, and I'm just like nursing it with some salt to get some electrolytes back in. Just again, it's easy, it's refreshing. You're getting carbohydrates as well as other nutritive benefit like potassium from the coconut water, all of these phytochemicals from the tart cherries. So just kind of sipping that is giving you like a multifaceted recovery attack on your
yeah,
body in a good way, right?
yeah, I like that. And I'm even
Recovery
thinking
assault.
of like, even on like deload weeks, let's say you don't want to fit the bill of taking cherry juice every single day, but we have testing throughout the entire year. So basically, every 3 months, we're doing testing. So I'm even thinking maybe the week before testing or on a week of deload to get like full recovery. So you're fresh going into that following week.
Yes.
Where it's going to be a high week. Is that something that would work as well?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, anything's better than nothing. Like, even for me, because the product's so expensive, like, I'll get, let's say, 12 in a month, right, of the individual bottles. I'm timing those on my heaviest training days.
Perfect.
Like, today, for example, I put a weighted vest on and I ran 5 miles with my daughter in the stroller. And then I went for an 8 mile run later in the day. So, like, today was like a heavy day for me personally. So, I had tart cherry juice following that afternoon run because today, was a heavy training day. Recovery is ever more important for me going into tomorrow. Um, and then I'll probably consume my other tart cherry juice this week later during again what I deem to be a heavier day for this week.
That's a little bit, no pun intended, more palatable from like just a financial standpoint of like, all right, I lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If I'm really trying to move the needle on strength and power, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to prioritize getting a cherry juice in for optimizing my recovery, along with the other supplements, magnesium, things like that.
Absolutely.
I like that. And the thing I didn't want to stop you earlier, but just on the supplement side, because you see so much stuff online, I'm seeing more popular with creatine gummies. I'm
Mm.
curious. I personally don't take it. I just do regular creatine monohydrate powder, and I'll just throw it in a protein shake, and it's good. My issue, and I'm curious yours, is the concentrate. Is it actually what you're getting? That's my concern.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the study off the top of my head. There was a study I just saw not too long ago that measured a whole bunch of different brands of gummies and found that like you're not getting nearly the amount of creatine that they're claiming.
Gotcha.
Yes, gummies have their place because it's super convenient. Let's say you're doing like a work trip and you don't want to pack powder, even though a lot of companies now have individual packets with dosing. I'd recommend that. But if like gummies are your only option, as long as you're getting it from a, third party tested, high quality manufacturer, it's probably still better than nothing. You're getting some extras when you consume a gummy. It could be sugar, it could be sugar alcohols, right? Artificial sweeteners. What I like about creatine powder is that that's all you're getting. You know exactly what you're getting. You know the dose is appropriate, and you know that there's no funny business going on. The business of gummies is definitely funny business, so it seems based on that recent article. But they're not the they're not the worst thing in the world, but absolutely my personal bias and preference would be just to get the real deal in powdered form. And if you can find travel packs of powder for those travel days, or let's say you're a tactical professional going to the field and you don't want to pack your big jug of creatine, if you're going to be in the field for, Monday through Friday, pack 5 individual packets.
Yeah, I agree. And creatine, honestly, is one of the more cheap supplements out there, especially creatine monohydrate. Is that what you go with? Just a
Of
basic
course,
monohydrate?
absolutely.
That's the same thing. Okay.
Yep, all the other stuff out there that tries to get all fancy,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of great science to back up its effectiveness over the creatine monohydrate.
Awesome. That's what I figured. Cool. All right. So we just covered through September, which was the power block. So in that block, basically just to differentiate it between the power block and what the next block is that I'm going to talk about. With the power block, we were focusing on an explosive movement first, then going into more of a strength movement, and then going into hypertrophy in our tier 3 block. Now, moving from October to December towards the end of the year, we are going power endurance. So basically what that's going to look like is going to be a heavy movement first, heavy squat, bench, and deadlift variation first. Then we're going into power. So more power endurance, and then finishing off the day with some hypertrophy. So still working our strength, still working our power, but now we're trying to be explosive in a fatigue state. All right. And having repeatable bouts of explosive activity, and maybe when you're not as fresh. So that's the general theme for that last block of the year. And from a conditioning side of the house, it is mid distance improvement. So 2 5 mile ish range for the run improvement, and then working ascent conditioning. So the ability to climb mountains, go hunting, whatever, during this time frame. And that's, again, this is through hunting season too, selfishly, Eric. So October through December. So all those things in mind. So more power endurance, being explosive in a fatigue state. Love to hear your thoughts from a nutrition side.
Yeah. So going back to energy systems, I
Yeah.
actually just was down in Arkansas teaching some students about nutrition, and a student asked me a great question. They say, creatine's a fuel source and it lasts, 5 to 10 seconds for these explosive movements. So what happens when you're out? Well, the answer is you resort to anaerobic glycolysis. Your body will still be able to perform, but now you're using carbohydrate to power it. So you're not using that creatine as the fuel source. It's going to be carbohydrate. So if we are trying to work in these more fatigued states and still be able to explode up and have power, we need to have carbohydrate availability. So again, without beating a dead horse, it is ever more important to make sure that we are still consuming enough carbohydrate throughout the day. And again, just like the training has now built upon itself throughout this entire year, we are now approaching like game day, like the game day. This could be deployment. This could be traditional athletics in actual competition season. Now we've had time to, work our body composition over the first, um, let's say 6-ish months, getting us to a point to preseason to where our body should be to kind of where we want it to be. We've also been really trying to dial in our nutrition strategy. So we've mastered the base of the pyramid, and now we've started to work with that strategic supplementation and nutrient timing. So in this final block, we're going to assume that all of those things have been ironed out and they're in a really, really good place. So all we're doing here is kind of fine tuning a race car, right? We're making sure that we're staying consistent. We're making sure that anything that starts to appear, like injury wise, like, oh, I'm starting to notice a little, ache in this joint. Okay, like let's address that. Let's address that through training. Let's address that through PT. Let's address that through nutrition. Let's make sure that we're really 100% tip top shape going into this competition season. So, all the nutrition strategies here are really going to boil down to the individual and what that individual is training for specifically. To your point, are we going on an elk hunt? Are we deploying to, an environment that is at elevation? Are we running an ultra marathon at elevation? Because all those things will now have more nuanced nutrition approaches. Using elevation as just one example, we're going to want to get blood work drawn. We're going to want to make sure that our iron status is good. Because if we are for any reason iron deficient, even to a small degree, now our ability to carry oxygen to working tissues is diminished. Absolutely something you don't want in an environment that has less oxygen available to us in the first place. We also may consider supplementing vitamin E strategically. That's an area of research that is still semi gray, shows some promise, but not enough to give a full evidence-based rec yet. But things like this that are more nuanced to the environment, to the specific goal that you're training for, that is what the nutrition focus is going to be in this final block of training.
Awesome. Love it, Eric. Love it. I think, again, selfishly, I'm doing Warfighter as well. I'm doing the training program. So it's nice hearing it from your standpoint of how to go about each block and each time of the year. And I know our audience is going to get a lot out of that because one, there's no fad. You didn't recommend one fad diet in there, just the same way we don't recommend a fad training program. Like there's a system and a structure to the way we do our business, whether it's you with nutrition and us with strength and conditioning. And that's why this is great because we both speak the same language, just from two ends of the spectrum, but they blend together. So, I think that was awesome. If people have more follow-up questions, obviously they can hit us up in the Train Heroic and they can hop on the nutrition calls. If you're on Warfighter already, hop on those Q&As. We need more people hopping on because you're providing incredible information and we don't know what you guys don't know unless you ask us. So definitely reach out and hit us up with questions. Anything else you wanted to touch on, Eric, before we wrap up here?
No, I think that really covers it. I'd say just like final words of wisdom as something to summarize, don't get too focused on the things that are so easy to see on social media that seem extreme, that seem really advanced. Focus first on mastering the basics and becoming extremely proficient in all the things that aren't sexy, making it a habit to meal prep, making sure that you're eating consistently enough food, making sure that you're getting your macro splits dialed in, and making sure that you're listening to your body and then addressing them in real time. Oh, wow. Like I feel like I didn't have a lot of energy during that workout. Okay, well, I slept 8 hours and I slept pretty good. So maybe it's something with my nutrition. Oh, yeah. Like, wow, I ate only 25% of my calories from carbohydrates yesterday. That could be a really quick fix. So just making sure that you're doing all of the basics and then working your way up to those more advanced strategies. Focus there first. You'd be surprised at how big of a difference that can make if you're off in any one of those bottom tier categories.
Awesome, brother. Truly appreciate it. And
My pleasure.
if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to hit you up?
Yeah, why don't you just hit me up through Modern Athlete? We've been doing I've now taken over the nutrition questions during the weekly Q&As. And then obviously if you DM Modern Athlete, you will get in touch with me through there. So any one of the platforms we use, be it School or Discord or Train Heroic, I'm on there. Just if there's any way to tag me, it always helps. Otherwise, one of the other coaches will make sure that your message is heard.
Awesome, brother. Truly appreciate your time, man. Super informative, and I got a ton out of it, and I know our crew will as well. So thanks, brother.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Take care.